In the news tonight, the Independent Election Commission announces the preliminary official results in all 23 constituencies across the kingdom. The Syrian president says he sees no quick end to the war in his country as warplanes mount one of the deadliest airstrikes in months in Aleppo. And Iraqi forces backed by US-led airstrikes gain complete control of a key northern district near Mosul. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. The Independent Election Commission announced the preliminary official results of parliamentary polls in all 23 constituencies across the kingdom. Mustafa Barari, head of the Special Committee to the Audit Parliamentary Election Results, had just announced the winning candidates in the Central Badia district at a press conference. The Central Badia was the last of the constituencies to have the results declared. Barari earlier read out the winners' names in Amman's 5 districts and the rest of the constituencies nationwide. Authorities and election observers said the election went smoothly and was generally peaceful except for isolated incidents that did not mar the process. Electoral Commission head of the Board of Commissioners, Khlalde, told a press conference that the board had adopted all the results announced officially by Barari over the past 2 days. He said 20 women had won seats in the 130-seat lower house, 15 in the women's quota and the 5 outside the quota. He said 5 women had served in previous parliaments. He also said 56 winning male candidates had served in previous parliaments. Khlalde also said the commission had invalidated 4 ballot boxes which were stolen and returned in the Central Badia district. The EU Election Observation Mission to Jordan said the parliamentary election was an inclusive process in the framework of an ongoing political reform process backed by the European Union and other international stakeholders. In a press conference, Chief of EU Election Observation Mission, Joe Leinen, said the opening and counting process had proceeded in a peaceful and quiet atmosphere. He said voting was generally well organized in 441 out of the 459 polling stations the EU mission had monitored, and that the confidentiality of the balloting was observed in most of the polling stations. Prime Minister Hani Molghi said the government did not interfere in the parliamentary elections and remained neutral. He told European Union election observers, led by EU Observation Mission Chief Observer and Member of the European Parliament, Joe Leinen, that the government's role was to lend support to the Independent Election Commission. The head of the EU mission said the polls were a key step on the path of political reform. He referred to a press conference the mission had held earlier in the day in which it said the electoral process was inclusive and well administrated. Leinen said the mission had monitored the polls from the start of the campaigning and throughout the voting process, ending up with the announcement of the results. He commended the Electoral Commission for inviting the EU mission to monitor the polls for the second time. The Prime Minister said Jordan, under the directives of His Majesty the King, was keen to hold the parliamentary elections despite the regional turmoil. Prime Minister Hani Molghi said Jordan would welcome joint ventures with Iraq, mainly in the transport sector. He told the Iraqi Transport Minister, Kazem Hamami, that the two neighboring countries had historically maintained deep ties and that Jordan seeks to further advance cooperation. The Iraqi minister, who conveyed an invitation from Iraqi Prime Minister Haider Abadi, said Jordan will be a priority in Iraq's development projects. The Iraqi minister briefed Molghi on a decision by Al-Abadi to form a committee to take the necessary measures to reopen the land route between the two countries. The Iraqi minister was due to visit Safwan border crossing between Iraq and Kuwait, which is currently used by Jordanian trucks for export to Iraq after the closure of Terbil route that links Iraq with Jordan. The minister said Iraq will address obstacles facing the flow of Jordanian goods to the Iraqi market and lower fees imposed on them. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said he sees no quick end to the war in his country. He added in an interview with AP News the war would drag on as long as it is part of what he called a global conflict in which terrorists are backed by a number of countries. Commenting on an airstrike that targeted Syrian soldiers in Deir ez-Zor, Assad said the deadly attack was intentional. Warplanes mounted the heaviest airstrikes in months against rebel-held districts of the Syrian city of Aleppo overnight. The director of a hospital in the rebel-held east of Aleppo said 45 people were killed in the attacks. The airstrikes came as Russia and the Syrian government ignored a U.S. plea to halt flights, burying any hope for the revival of a doomed ceasefire. Rebel officials and rescue workers said incendiary bombs were among the weapons that rained from the sky on the city. This report has more.
If there was any hope for reviving the ceasefire in Syria, the latest aerial attacks on Aleppo all but bury it. These images purport to show phosphorus bombs being dropped on the city. They're designed to explode and spread fire on impact. A monitoring group says warplanes mounted their heaviest airstrikes in months against rebel-held areas of the besieged city. One rescue worker said it's as if the planes are trying to compensate for all the bombs they didn't drop last week. A local hospital says 45 people were killed in the overnight bombing. But at least one agreement to reduce the violence in Syria is moving ahead. Several hundred rebels and their families left their last stronghold in the city of Homs in a planned evacuation. They're headed by bus to Idlib province, part of a deal with the government for safe passage to areas controlled by insurgents. Still, the airstrikes by Syria or Russian allies or both are a clear statement. Damascus and Syria have rejected U.S. pleas for a halt to flights, so the ceasefire, such as it is, can be salvaged.
The United Nations said it is possible that countries backing the Syria peace process would agree today to salvage a collapsed ceasefire. UN Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Azzeddine Ramzi, told reporters in Geneva that world body is still working to restart peace talks within weeks. He said the United States and Russia had the backing of other states in the International Syria Support Group, ISSG, which was to meet later on in New York for the second time this week to reinvigorate their joint truce plan.
Chairs are determined to make the agreement work, and they have the support of the members of the Security Council. That was absolutely clear, and hopefully today this will be reflected in the deliberations of the ISSG. Clearly, the resumption of the talks would be greatly helped by revitalizing the cessation of hostilities.
As aid deliveries remained on hold in Aleppo, a convoy of trucks carrying aid for 35,000 people began to enter besieged Mardamiya in rural Damascus. UN humanitarian advisor Jan Egeland appealed to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and rebel groups to allow aid convoys to enter eastern Aleppo. UN relief operations in Syria resumed after a 48-hour suspension after the 31-truck convoy was attacked on Monday in western Aleppo. A staff member and around 20 civilians were reported killed in a warehouse destroyed in the attack.
East Aleppo is militarily encircled. It's impossible to get in with our aid. 40 trucks are sitting at the Turkish-Syrian border. The food will be expiring on Monday. The drivers are sleeping at the border, and they've done so now for a week. Please, President Assad, do your bit to enable us to get to eastern Aleppo and also the other besieged areas.
Iraqi forces backed by airstrikes from the US-led coalition gained complete control of the northern district of Shriqat. The advance would bring the military a step closer to a main push on the major city of Mosul later this year. Residents of villages near Shriqat celebrated their liberation from Daesh militants. Brigadier General Yahya Rasool, spokesman for the militia's Joint Operations Command, said in a statement that the district had been liberated. Shriqat on the Tigris River, 100 kilometers south of Mosul, has been surrounded for months by Iraqi troops and Iranian-backed militias allied to the government. Iraqi forces advanced swiftly through the area after Prime Minister Haider Abadi announced the operation on Tuesday morning. Tens of thousands of civilians are thought to be trapped in the town and nearby villages. The death toll from a Saudi-led coalition airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi militia left 26 people dead. Fighter jets launched missiles at a neighborhood near a presidential palace in the Red Sea port city of Hudaydiyah, occupied by leaders of the Iran-allied Houthi militia. Sources said a raid hit a house in a neighborhood populated by workers near the palace, killing 26 and wounding 60. A Houthi leader, Ali al-Ahmad, said in a tweet he had survived a raid on the presidential palace. Residents of Charlotte, North Carolina woke up to a state of emergency and the National Guard and State Highway Patrol deployed to their city. The state of emergency was ordered after a second night of unrest sparked by the fatal police shooting of a black man. A peaceful rally in response to this shooting turned violent last night as protesters threw rocks and bottles at police in a riot gear, smashed windows and doors and looted stores in downtown Charlotte. Officers fired rubber bullets, tear gas, flashbang grenades and used pepper spray to disperse the crowd. UFL launched the logo and branding for Euro 2020. The logo was unveiled in London, the venue for the tournament's semi-finals and final after 12 other cities across the continent host early matches. Under the format being used to the tournament's 60th anniversary, those cities will stage 4 games each, with the semi-finals and final at Wembley in the English capital. The 12 group venues are Amsterdam, Baku, Bilbao, Brussels, Bucharest, Budapest, Copenhagen, Dublin, Glasgow, Munich, Rome and St. Petersburg. William Tilburg midfielder Anoyar Kali became the first player in the Netherlands to get his marching orders from the video assistant referee VAR after his yellow card in a Dutch Cup tie against Ajax Amsterdam was turned into a red. It was the first time television assistance was fully used in on-field decision-making. The VAR can review an incident which asked by the match referee as well as an advise officials on the field about incidents they may have missed. The International Football Association Board, which oversees the rules of the game, is expected to decide in 2018 whether to authorize the use of video technology and include it in the laws. And finally, the weather forecast. Relatively cold across the highlands tonight and fair in most areas with moderate winds and some low clouds, particularly in northern and central regions. Tomorrow, temperatures will further drop, becoming 2 to 3 degrees below the seasonal average, so it will be mild in hilly areas and moderate to relatively hot in the rest of the kingdom, with some clouds and a slim chance for light showers in the north and center. Winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk and dusty sometimes, particularly in desert areas. Temperatures in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea will be in the mid-30s. The Gulf Aqaba should expect a relatively hot day Friday with a high of 36 degrees, northerly winds and somewhat choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here are the main points for tonight. The Independent Election Commission announces the preliminary official results in all 23 constituencies across the kingdom. The Syrian president says he sees no quick end to the war in his country as warplanes mount one of the deadliest airstrikes in months in Aleppo. And Iraqi forces backed by US-led airstrikes gain complete control of a key northern district near Mosul. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Lawal Balkar. Have a lovely weekend.